just now, as Yatin has interviewed Dimitri, I
Yeah,
think this is a very personal experience. And
yeah,
maybe after 3 or 4 minutes, we will talk about something very different. It's
yeah.
about Sino-Russia relationship.
Right,
Yeah, it's nothing about the personal experience, but we can have some personal perspective,
right,
right?
right, 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 right.
So I think it's a good opportunity for all
Mm-hmm.
of us to talk about the Sino-Russian relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You are Russia, I'm
Yeah,
Chinese,
yeah.
we are in Germany.
You're right.
It's interesting. I think Sino-Russia relationship is important. It
Right.
has an impact on the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Probably we can discuss the Sino-Russian relationship from the war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Just now, you have mentioned the American government, the U.S. President is pressuring
Yeah.
Ukraine to accept a
Mm-hmm.
28 points
Mm-hmm.
peace plan,
Mm-hmm.
the so-called peace plan.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can talk about this peace plan
Mm-hmm.
as a beginning, and then probably we can talk about its impact on Sino-Russia relationship
Mm-hmm.
and whatever. It's just a
Right.
free conversation.
Right.
So my first question to
Mm-hmm.
Dimitri, I know you are also very interested in the war in Ukraine and its impact
Right.
on the rest of the world. How do
Mm-hmm.
you think of the 28-point plan from the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
government? Do you think it's possible, feasible? Do you think
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine will accept this plan?
Mm-hmm. I think of course we're still very early in real negotiation process. I definitely don't expect any breakthroughs. And so I don't expect any peace in the near future. But at least it's interesting to see that they're doing something in a way that at least this peace plan, to me, it seems more, it's getting to Russian position closer, because it is, I mean, it is as a plan more favorable to Russians, right? Because it basically means for Ukraine to capitulate, right? Because Ukraine has to give the lands, it has to give it will Russia will get recognition for the lands that it gets, and then of course Russia also reintegrates into the West. I mean into G8 at least. It was very interesting, like part of the deal for me at least to analyze. And of course, what makes it also interesting for me, it's there was some involvement of a very senior Russian politician, like the head of the Russian like this big fund, right? Basically, the old pile of Russian cash that they have, and I mean they still don't use it that much, but like the person obviously has a very important role in Russian society. So in this case, I still don't expect much. For me, it's just probably the first steps in the development process. And also, one thing important to mention, of course, when we bring Ukraine into conversation, Russia does have at least now a significant advantage in the front line. Again, I'm not a military expert, but it seems once they captured Pokrovsk or something like this, and now they go into the next winter, and then after winter, obviously Russia would have another offensive. That something is starting to change because, of course, we are having the war for more than 4 years. I mean, oh, it will be almost 4 years very soon, which is a very long time for intense war. And of course, the war will have to settle somehow, right? So for me, it's just important first part of some process. I would say I do analyze it as an important development. So how do you look at it? Also maybe from Chinese perspective.
Yeah, I cannot comment on the development
Yeah.
from the so-called Chinese perspective because China is so big, so
Yeah.
complex. So just my personal perspective. So I do agree with your assessment. The
Mm,
28-point plan from Trump administration
mm,
is very favorable to Russia.
mm,
According to this plan, I have not gone through the full details of this plan, but I know some high-level information about this
mm,
plan. Ukraine must abandon its territory in Donbass.
Right.
Actually, this is a demand from Russia for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, and Ukraine cannot join NATO.
NATO, yeah.
Ukraine is not allowed to join NATO in the long run, maybe 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine has to make an official promise,
Mm-hmm.
and Ukraine armed forces must be reduced to maximum 600,000
Mm-hmm.
personnel.
Mm-hmm.
This is very tough condition for
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine. For some European politicians, they call it as a capitulation
Right,
of
right, right.
Ukraine. I don't know, but generally speaking, it's very favorable for Russia. So I'm thinking about why the U.S. government is putting huge pressure, tremendous
Mm-hmm.
pressure on Ukraine to accept Russia demands.
Mm-hmm.
This is very different from the position of the predecessor of Trump. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Biden administration. Actually, Biden administration
Mm-hmm.
has supported
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine with
Mm-hmm.
tremendous money and military
Mm-hmm.
equipment, as well
Mm-hmm.
as moral support. So, but Trump has changed the U.S. position radically. I'm thinking about it. I think in the past we have discussed
Mm-hmm.
fundamental reason behind the
Mm-hmm.
radical change. I mean, the U.S. does not support. I mean, U.S. supports neither Russia nor Ukraine. I think the fundamental national interest of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
is that the Eurasia continent should not
Mm-hmm.
be dominated by anyone, by
Mm-hmm.
anyone, France, Germany, Russia, China, anyone.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. does not allow any country who is dominant in the
Mm-hmm.
Eurasia continent
Mm-hmm.
because the logic is quite simple. If Eurasia continent is united by any country, then that country will have the power and the resource to challenge the hegemony of the
Mm-hmm.
United States. That's why the U.S. has participated in the World War One, World
Mm-hmm.
War Two, and the Cold War. Right now, I think the number one challenger of the U.S. hegemony is China.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to counter China's rise, the U.S. has to do everything and anything to weaken China's power or influence. Right now, China is united with Russia. I
Mm-hmm.
think. I mean, China and Russia have very good relationship. I think Trump is very. I mean, Trump has tremendous anxiety toward the Sino-Russia coordination
Mm-hmm.
or collaboration, something. That's why it's very urgent for him to
Mm-hmm.
end the war in Ukraine, thereby U.S. Can therefore U.S. can transfer or shift its resource and attention from Europe
Mm-hmm.
to the so-called Indo-Pacific
Mm-hmm.
or Asia. I think this is the reason, and in order to do that, he must put pressure on both sides,
Mm-hmm.
Russia and Ukraine. It has proved that Trump is not in the position
Mm-hmm.
to change Putin because Putin is so tough. Trump has tried
Mm-hmm.
several times, but he has failed. It looks he has more leverage
Mm-hmm.
on Ukraine because Ukraine is dependent on the support from the U.S. and European countries. If you are talking about the military dimension, I think the U.S. Plays more important role than European countries. That's why the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. has leverage. I think this is uh, geopolitical logic
Right.
behind Trump's plan. This is
Mm-hmm.
my general
Mm-hmm.
understanding.
Mm-hmm.
What's your idea?
I think I also agree with your assessment. Something I remembered actually from the plan. There's also one part of the plan is to that America gets access to Russian what do they call, like, not the mineral resources but some resources for um um some some resources it gets to critical minerals from Russia, and maybe if you of course follow the whole like this AI race between China and the US, and the importance of critical mineral is something that we as analysts should pay attention to, and I think it's also yet kind of strengthens your thesis here because and it's also interesting, of course, because it seems like now Trump gives Russia more incentives to reintegrate into the West, because I mean, first G8, of course, lifting of sanctions, and then access, and then Russia would trade critical minerals with the US, which is like, if you think about those 3 points, it's a very big shift from, of course, from Biden, but especially even from just the current situation where Russia is completely isolated from the West. Um, so it's definitely interesting to see to see this development, but then of course it is a plan, something how it will look actually in the future. It's something we have just to see because it also cannot many things from this plan they probably won't materialize. Um, but I mean, it's also maybe interesting to ask you whether you think like the US is trying to flirt with this idea of detaching Russia from China, or maybe trying to get some advantage from Russia right now, because of course I think it's like for like it's just like geopolitics 101. If you get Russia on board now against China, I mean, the US will get some advantage. I mean, you can argue whether it's significant advantage or not, but it will, at least it can tip the balance of power, of course, in Eurasia, but also in the world itself, because Russian American alliance potential can have certain implications, beneficial implications for Americans.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think the impact of the end of Ukraine war is huge. It seems that
Hmm.
Ukraine has limited choice. Yeah, of course, Ukraine will discuss with the European airlines, uh, but it seems that the U.S. government is determined to end the war and shift its focus, I mean, attention and resource from Europe to Indo-Pacific. I think it's quite clear that Trump is trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Right now, Russia and China work closely. They support
Hmm.
each other. China has economic power and
Hmm.
technological resource,
Hmm.
and Russia has tremendous natural resource, and
Hmm.
Russia's military force are still very powerful. Yes, Russia has not performed very well in the
Hmm.
battlefield in Ukraine, but Russia still has formidable military forces, especially its nuclear military forces. So
Hmm.
Russia is still a formidable superpower from my point of view. I mean, if Russia and China work very closely, this will be a huge problem for the U.S. Yeah, I think Trump has the intention to drive a wedge between Russia and China,
Hmm.
like the so-called reverse
Hmm.
Nixon-Kissinger process. Everyone is talking about that.
Hmm.
But intention is just intention. It
Hmm.
does not mean the capabilities
Hmm.
or the outcome. But right now, I think probably it's possible that Trump can uh, attract Russia more than before. Maybe Russia will not break its relationship with China. Definitely.
Hmm.
I mean, today it's not possible to repeat the stories in 1970s.
Hmm.
I don't think the reverse Nixon-Kissinger process is
Hmm.
possible, but it's possible for the U.S. to drive a wedge between Russia and China because
Hmm.
right now, from my point of view, Russia is very dependent on China's support,
Hmm.
economical support, moral support,
Hmm.
probably military support, because China has provided a lot of dual purpose
Hmm.
products to Russia. I mean, both for the civilian purpose and military purpose. So Russia is very reliant on China. I think the offer from the US is very attractive to Russia because Russia can return the G8 group and the sanctions imposed by Western countries will be cancelled. So I think that means Russia has the opportunity to join the community of Western countries, both European countries and the US, because I think Russia's identity is still a European country.
Right.
If we have knowledge about Russian history, I think, yeah, from cultural perspective, Russia is still one member of the European community. Maybe European countries have very complex feeling about Russia. But if you look at the history, Russia is a European country. So if the war is ended in Ukraine, I think Russia will have chance to join the European community again. Yeah, I think this is very attractive to Russia. This time, I think the probability has increased that the war can be ended and Russia will return the Western community. This will be, of course, challenging to China because China will be, I mean, right now, China has Russia as a partner or ally or whatever. But in the future, if the war in Ukraine is ended, that means Russia will be more distant from China. So I think for Chinese decision makers, they will not be happy to see that progress.
Right. I think it's also, of course, interesting that from Russian interests, like Europe itself is way much more valuable than the US. Because, like, first of all, it's actually pretty hard for Russia to trust the US. Again, as you said, maybe the reverse Kissinger policy would actually be very difficult to achieve because Russia like looks at US actions and it doesn't trust. And if you even can achieve something between, let's say, Trump and Putin, there is no guarantee that it's a sustainable policy beyond that, beyond Trump term, which actually ends, I mean, almost in 2 years, like soon in 2 years, so to speak. So it's something like, okay, 3 years, but it's still a very short period of time. And of course, Russia wouldn't just abandon relations with China just because of that. But something also what's interesting then, of course, if we look at European, I would say market, European integration as Russian um, long-term trajectory, a long-term goal. Of course, it's interesting whether, um, of course, it's interesting whether it's very interesting. What would be the role of China in this, like say, like a renewed relationship between Russia and Europe? Because I feel there is in some parts of Russian, I would say geopolitical, like in some geopolitical thinkers, let's say in Russian elites, they have like this almost like a dream that Russia would be a country that unites China and Europe, or in a way that, that Russia is like a bridge builder. And maybe you've heard of that. I mean, it used to be a very popular idea before, of course, the war and like everything that happened, especially before even 2014, that Russia is actually this Eurasian country that has, of course, a foot in the West, and then has a foot like has a good relationship with China. So once you can can you connect the dots and make Russia as like this bridge civilizational, I would say bridge builder. That's this kind of Russian purpose and mission in the world. Of course, I don't know whether it's true or not because it's very, of course, difficult. It would be very difficult for Russia to reintegrate with the current European, I would say, government. I mean, European Union policy and agenda. But if something changes significantly in European Union, or if something changes, for example, in Germany, if we have a complete reversal, if AfD comes to power, for example, you can have actually pretty significant change of course in European policy as well. And then maybe Russia can play like an interesting role here.
Mhm.
Because I mean, I definitely I'm not that knowledgeable, of course, about the Chinese foreign policy, but I definitely don't actually trust. I would say I don't trust like American perception of China because American perception of China it's the similar in Russia, like American perception of Russia. Russia is just this like imperial power that just wants evil in the world. I think it's I definitely maybe not the case. Like, well, I mean, maybe parts of it are true that China wants to maximize its power, but then of course every country wants to maximize its power. So it's not just China or Russia. What I'm trying to say is maybe of course reintegration of Russia in European, I would say, community would be beneficial for China as well, because then you can build like Silk Road to Europe through Russia, and have like a way much more European community integrated into this Eurasian landmass, something like this. Yeah, yeah,
This is a very interesting idea that the Eurasian continent can be united.
right,
You have mentioned Russia wants to be the bridge between East and West.
right,
From geographical perspective, this is natural
right,
because Russia is located between Europe and Asia. So Russia should be the bridge between the West and the East. This is a fantastic idea, but it's very idealistic from my point of view. I think after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has the idea uh, Russia has promoted the idea that the Eurasian continent should be united from Lisbon to Vladivostok. There should be one community,
right.
one security architecture. But for me, this is very idealistic. Just now you have mentioned evil or something like that. I think I'm a realist. I think from realist perspective, no country is evil or angel. No,
Yeah,
no, everyone is the same. Everyone
yeah,
is the
yeah,
same good, same bad.
yeah,
From
yeah.
my point of view, I think this is an old question because for the maritime power and the continental power, they have different understanding about the world from the geopolitical perspective. The continental power want to conquer more territory because if you have more territory, you have more resource, you have more power. And the maritime power is different. They want to promote trade. And if from promoting trade, you can have more wealthy. So they have different idea. And for the maritime powers like the British Empire and today's American Empire, for me, the U.S. is an empire. They always have used the strategy of divide and rule, and they are always successful. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Everyone is clear that the British Empire and the United States are very good at the strategy of divide and rule. But so what? I mean, the Eurasian continents cannot be united. Like you have mentioned, probably probably it's good for everyone if Russia can play the role of the bridge between China and the West. Actually, Russia has the idea Eurasia economic union. China has the idea too. The Belt and Road Initiative. Actually, for China, the original purpose of Belt and Road Initiative is to connect China and Europe through Russia. Through Russia. Russia is in the middle between China and Europe. This is the idea of China, but I think it's very, very difficult. Because there are so many problems, conflicts, contradictions, confrontations between among Eurasia countries. For example, between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and the EU, between Russia and China, between China and Japan,
Mhm.
between Japan and Russia.
Mhm.
There are so many contradictions. So it's very easy for the United States to drive wedge between these countries. For example, right now, there is a huge, very fierce conflict between China and Japan.
Mhm.
And Japan has a support from the US, and
Mhm.
I think it's very easy for the US to encourage Japan to confront against China,
Mhm.
and China has no choice but to escalate the conflict with
Mhm.
Japan. Actually, for me, the conflict between China and Japan has been escalated.
Mhm.
It looks quite dangerous for both countries.
Mhm.
I mean, it's always a good idea to unite the Eurasia countries, but from practical perspective, it is
Mhm.
really difficult. Really difficult. I
Mhm.
think in the foreseeable future, I don't think it's realistic. For
Mhm.
example, uh, now U.S. is putting pressure on Ukraine and
Mhm.
probably its European allies,
Mhm.
but I don't think European countries will accept the Trump plan. I think
Mhm.
there will be conflict between Brussels and
Mhm.
Washington. I think the support from European side is still very strong, and
Mhm.
the European countries are taking more responsibility in supporting Ukraine.
Mhm.
For example, we are in Germany, and
Mhm.
Germany is taking actions. Yeah, maybe slowly, but
Mhm.
it's unreversible. And
Mhm.
Germany is investing more on defense, both the military force build up and the defense industries. I
Mhm.
think Germany is determined to do that, and
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's not so easy for EU and Ukraine to surrender.
Okay.
So this is my
Mhm.
estimation.
Yeah, at first glance, I would also say it's not, I mean, they wouldn't probably want to surrender Ukraine, but then of course you look at the I would say macroeconomic conditions of the European Union, and they also, it seems like they don't look that good. So it's not that the European Union can do anything with that in a way that from a long-term perspective, even like let's say 2 3 years perspective, there is no leverage for European, like there's no leverage in the European Union to impact like this dynamic, because
Mhm.
like first of all, you have like recession in Germany, which is like, the biggest economy. So like, and then I mean everything else. If even if Germany has recession, then everyone else definitely not feeling good in the European, let's say, like economic system. So it's something also that I think a lot about, because it seems there can be a reversal of the whole European, I would say, agenda or policy, and of course it can happen very easily if you have like the if AfD comes to power in Germany, or if there are changes in France, which are two countries that are critical for European, I would say, integration and future development. So of course, and of course, like for example, European countries, they had period of time to demonstrate that they can step in this war and do something, like during this 1 year since Trump became president. But of course, they didn't do anything. So it's also like it's a very in European it's a very European thing to have like this rhetoric, but then failing to fulfill like those not even obligations, but those desires to be part of the conflict and stuff like this. So of course it's a very interesting dynamic, but then of course, like realistically, of course, I question whether they can do actually anything, because Ukraine, I mean, from Ukrainian perspective, it's also interesting because I would also think at a certain point Ukraine would become very frustrated with both the United States and European Union, because of course, like now Ukraine understands that there is a chance that the US will completely withdraw from support of Ukraine. But then they also understand that, I mean, Ukraine also understands that realistically, European Union just talks a lot and just does nothing for Ukraine. So this is also, of course, it's a very dangerous place to be for Ukraine, because they need to make decisions, and there's also they have their own internal policy and stuff like that. So it's also interesting to look at it from this perspective. And I mean, I think they don't really have they don't really have just leverage to
Mhm.
change anything. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, this is very popular perception toward Europe.
Right.
Everyone looks down on Europe. Everyone, including American, Russia, and Chinese. Everyone believes
Yeah.
Europe is weak and
Yeah.
they don't have the power and they're not united and they have no military power. But I think probably people have underestimated
Uh,
Europe.
mm,
You know, now the EU is the second largest economy after
right.
the US. Previously, it was China, but now the total GDP of EU is a little bit more than China. This
Mm,
means EU has tremendous economic power,
mm,
and EU has a biggest single market in the world,
mm,
500 more than 500 million people, and most of them are developed countries.
mm,
So I mean, from economic perspective, actually EU is very very powerful. From
mm,
military perspective, EU is not weak. EU is
mm,
not weak at all, and the French have nuclear weapons. They have
mm,
nuclear driving carrier
mm.
craft
Yeah,
carriers,
yeah.
and of course, UK is also one European country. From my
Mm,
perspective, they have also nuclear weapons, and yeah, and this is from military perspective and from cultural perspective. I mean, soft
mm,
power. EU perceive itself as one normative power. I think
mm,
it's true, especially under the circumstances that the US is withdrawing from international stage. This means that EU has more moral influence than before. So this is true. I think we should not underestimate the power of the EU. For example, in Germany, well, in Germany, everyone believes Germany is finished, especially in China. Many Chinese people look down on Germany. They believe China has been more powerful than German industries, especially the automobile
mhm,
industry, because the electric vehicles, China has made a huge progress. Germany is finished.
mm,
I think this is wrong because Germany and EU are still very powerful. Right now, the economy of Germany is not so bad.
mm,
And according to the forecast of EU next year, the GDP of Germany, I mean 2026, will
mhm,
increase 1.6%.
mm,
This is very impressive. I think over the last years,
mm,
the growth of German economy is negative, but
mhm,
next year it will be 1.6%.
mhm,
One economist from Denmark has made one interview with one German newspaper. He is very optimistic. Maybe
mhm,
over the coming years, the prospect of German economy will be very
mhm,
positive because Germany has found a new source of growth,
mhm,
defense spending. Defense
mhm,
spending. Yeah, it's true that German car makers will lose market in US, in China,
mhm,
or somewhere else, but they will have new customers.
mhm, mhm,
Defense spending because Germany has decided to spend much more money
mhm,
on defense right
mhm,
now. So from this point of view, I do believe German economy will be very optimistic over
mhm,
the coming years. So I think European countries, including Germany, of course, still have a powerful
mhm,
leverage. For example, right now, China is the number one strategic threat for China.
mhm,
So, in order to counter the pressure from the American side,
mhm,
China needs the EU actually.
mhm,
Um, if we talk about the issue on Taiwan right now, China has huge conflict with Japan.
mhm,
Actually, EU has done something very bad from China's perspective. They have invited the so-called vice president of Taiwan to visit Brussels. This lady has spoken before European Parliament. But what's the response of China? It's not so strong like the protest against Japan because China still needs EU, not only the political support, but also the economic relations because China still needs the European technologies and the capitals and the market from the EU. I mean, for China, EU still has very strong leverage. For Russia, I think the situation is the same. Actually, Russia has very weak economic connection with the U.S., but with the European countries, the situation is different. I mean, I think the trade relationship between Russia and Europe still very strong. If the war is ended, if the sanctions are lifted, I think Russia will restore its economic ties with Europe. So I don't think European countries are weak, although they believe so. I think even the European people, even Germans, they believe we are helpless, we are so weak. It's not true. This is their tradition. They always believe they are weak, and all the other superpowers, China and Russia and Americans, they are too strong, too powerful. Well, we are nothing. We are small. It's not true. I think we should not underestimate Europe, including Germany. Actually, they are still very powerful. They have huge potential, especially Germany. Recently, I have seen one news. The U.S. government wants Germany to take over NATO. Right now, the top commander of NATO military forces in Europe is always one American general. Always. I mean, over the past 70 years, always the top commander of the NATO military forces is one American general. But now they want one European. To be clear, one German general to take over that responsibility. This means actually this is a golden opportunity for Europe, especially Germany, to take more responsibility, to become one normal, the so-called normal country, because right now the situation has changed radically. America, the United States wants to focus on China. Then American has to shift its burden, in other words, leadership to European countries, especially Germany. So from my point of view, Germany right now has a golden opportunity. The question is that if they can seize this opportunity. I think the merged government is determined to seize that opportunity. Merz has promised that the German military forces Bundeswehr should be the strongest military force in Europe. Of course, in conventional terms, not in nuclear terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's of course it's an interesting take. Also it goes contra main narratives, I would say, which just makes it definitely very um interesting to analyze. I think yeah, the problem with EU, of course, it's a still relatively new institution, so we do observe, I would say, its formation at this particular moment. So it's very unpredictable in a way. I think it's true that European Union holds a lot of potential, but since it holds a lot of potential, it can also break the same way because there is like a two-way street where it goes like into the this direction of more accumulating, I would say, more power in geopolitical terms. But of course, it also can go in the direction because it definitely has a lot of vulnerabilities because it's not literally one state. It consists of many states, and once it takes only one, I would say, member, like a foundational member of EU, to, of course, to crush the whole system in a way. So it remains to be seen what's with the European future from this perspective. I think definitely Russia right now serves as this unifying agent for European Union. because it seems that they found this new identity, how to define themselves, or we are something that against Russia, for example, which people couldn't say, I think, before maybe the war in Ukraine, because before the war in Ukraine, it was a little bit unclear what it means to develop like the common European defense system, like the common European defense network, or what it meant for European Union to have a common defense policy. Of course, in relation to Russia, it makes it more clear. But then, of course, I also, to a certain extent, I ask myself whether this is a sustainable dynamic, because, I mean, of course, there is a European Union, but Russia still is mostly, I think, afraid. Of course, we tend to believe, as an analyst, I think it's also conventional wisdom that Russia is afraid of the United States. It's actually not afraid of European Union. So once you get European Union or United States out of Europe, I mean, Russia can provoke European Union in a way because, I mean, of course, if they, I mean, I also don't believe in the fact that Russia would go uh, you would, start war with the European Union just for the sake of starting the war. But if tensions escalate, of course, Russia can provoke, I would say, some it can have some small provocation, whether it's in with Baltics or Norway. I mean, remains to be seen. Of course, Russia has I mean, how many neighbor? Like, I mean, Russia at least has, um, common. Russia has a boundary with so many European countries. There are so many ways to actually escalate the situation. So, I mean, yeah. Well, let's see. Let's say how it unfolds in the future. I mean, I'm also interested, maybe your take, whether it's true that, I mean, people saying China buys a lot of. I would say companies in Germany and in the European Union, so to speak, which is a very interesting development because most of them they go almost bankrupt. Like I mean, they're very big companies. I don't remember the exact names, but very big, like German conglomerates. Like they are now partially Chinese, so to speak, because they just they see the opportunity, Chinese see the opportunity, and they buy them. And of course, some of them. I mean, there was famously, like China famously, there was like this debate about the port in Hanover, like a very big port that China bought. Well, I mean, once we wanted to buy, maybe it was blocked by Americans or something like that. So China also invests a lot in European infrastructure, which is also well known, especially in the countries that are not that prosperous, like I don't know, Hungary or other smaller, Italy or some smaller countries. So it's also interesting for me to understand why is China doing this. So it's like, why is China investing actually in European Union, even though it seems if something happens in terms of between, let's say, America and China, I mean, it would be very easy to just take this property from Chinese, so to speak. You know, I don't know.
Not anymore. I think
Yeah,
maybe several years ago, China has invested a lot of money
yeah,
in Germany and other European countries, but not anymore. I
mm,
think because of many reasons. Firstly, China has no sufficient financial power to
mhm,
invest in European countries like before,
mhm,
because the Chinese domestic economy is not doing so well.
mhm,
I think China's financial power is more limited than
mhm,
previously. And secondly, for European countries now, they are more cautious for
mhm,
Chinese investment. For
mhm,
example, in Germany, they don't like Chinese investment like before, and there are many more restrictions,
mhm,
especially for the so-called critical infrastructure.
mhm,
So the situation has changed or not. But on the other hand, China still wants to invest in Europe
mhm,
because China sees Europe as one uh, continent different from the US. China has no geopolitical conflict with the EU, and China wants to improve its relationship with EU. China wants to encourage the so-called strategic autonomy of EU
mhm,
because China wants to shift the pressure from the United States. That's why China needs more friends,
mhm,
partners, if not allies. Because this is China's tradition, the so-called united front united front, united front. Okay, this is China's tradition. Actually, this is seen as one of the three magic weapons of the Chinese Communist Party to seize the power. The first is the armed struggle, and the second is the party building, and the third is the so-called united front. This is China's tradition. Of course, the number one enemy is the U.S. All the other countries, including EU and Japan, should be the potential friend of China. That's why China is using its economic power to achieve the political purpose. But it's not so easy because EU is very suspicious. I think EU is very critical toward China. I'm thinking about the uh, complex relationship between China, Russia, EU, and the US. I think we should look at the situation from a big picture, not from a single entity. So I think if the war in Ukraine is ended, the Sino-Russia relationship will become more complex because Russia will need China much less than previously. I think the pressure on Chinese side will increase tremendously. So I think China. I don't know. I don't know. The situation is very complex. Maybe China is not happy, but how can China influence the situation? I think it's very difficult for me as one Chinese. I think the situation will be more challenging for Chinese leadership. This is my estimation.
Yeah, it's also, I think, in relation to Sino-Russian relations, it's definitely not, I would say, enough time to be really aligned, so to speak, because it's been just okay, like they established a good relations maybe in zeros. So it has been just less than even 20 years between Russian Chinese rapprochement, so to speak. So it definitely takes way much more time to understand each other positions, even to work together more closely. At least I know it's which is interesting. Like back in the day when, for example, the school where where I studied French and French and English, they do teach Chinese, for example. So there is certain, even though it was always in English speaking school, which is interesting. So there is a certain level of integration of Chinese, even I would say, culture in Russian society. And not to say that, I mean, I think almost 25 or maybe even more percent of Russian car market now is coming from China or something like this. It takes actually way much because I mean you cannot actually export like a European car to Russia now. I mean it's illegal. I mean they're only way. I mean if not illegal from Russian perspective, but it's illegal for Europeans to export them directly or something like that. Anyway, which is of course interesting because as you said, it's very complex and of course, or if Russia reunites at certain capacity with Europe, there would be. I mean, it's interesting how the relations between Russia and China would look like. Whether I think it would be less, I would say, less. There would be some strain on relations. I mean, probably, but then of course, I think we all, to a certain extent, we all come back to how the situation is looking at the United States in the United States because it's still the most important actor in the world. So we also don't. I mean, until you take into account American dynamic, I think everything else kind of follows from there because I also don't know whether there will be another economic crash in the United States, which people discussed recently a lot, or whether how the situation is looking with the artificial intelligence, or so on and so on and so forth. So something that's very contingent on so many different aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very complex. Because our topic is about the Sino-Russia relationship.
Mhm.
From my perspective, I think the relationship between China and Russia will not be optimistic like right now. Why do I think so? Because we have to think about the foundation of the Sino-Russian relationship. Right now, the two countries are working very closely because they have same competitor or rivalry, the U.S. Because Russia is afraid of the U.S. So-called counter-revolution, especially under the administration of Democrats, it's like Biden, like Obama. They have encouraged the counter-revolution in the periphery countries of Russia, maybe inside Russia. And China same. So China is also afraid of the counter-revolution. I mean, this is the ideological fear of both Russia and China, because the ideological campaign supported by the American military power is very formidable for both Russia and China. So Russia and China have motivation to be united, not only from strategic, from geopolitical perspective, but also from ideological perspective, because the Western power, I mean the Western ideology, like the liberalism, is supported by their military power. European countries and the U.S., they are very rich and they are also very powerful in military terms. That's why Russia and China have no choice, because the survival of a regime is always the highest priority. I mean, both in Russia and China. So that's why they have very strong motivation to be united against the U.S. and the European countries. But right now, the situation has changed, because for the current American administration, Donald Trump, he has no any interest in ideology, freedom, democracies, or human rights. He doesn't care. He has no any interest in such values. So this means the danger from the U.S. to both Russia and China is reduced. Then Russia and China have less motivation to work together. Maybe the world will become more multipolar. I think both Russia and China are promoting the idea of a multipolar world. So I think, from my perspective, the world will be more chaotic. The U.S. is no longer the single hegemon. U.S. is not in the position anymore to dominate the entire world. So I think U.S. will shift its focus from Europe and the Middle East to Indo-Pacific Asia and maybe Latin America. Right now, it seems that there will be one huge conflict between the U.S. and Venezuela. I think U.S. has to withdraw from the world stage. U.S. has to focus more on Latin America and Indo-Pacific Asia. Of course, I think I think China is still the number one strategic competitor of the U.S. This will not change, but I mean the close relationship between China and Russia will be more complex. This is my estimation.
Right, and of course, it's also, I think when we talk about those big topics, it's important to look at the economy. And what struck me, I recently read this article on how China creates. I mean, China buys a lot of physical gold right now, right? And it wants to create this, what is like a kind of new reserve system where they build those. I don't know how to even explain it. It's like these institutions, for example, in Russia, in other BRICS countries. So once you buy like a Chinese yuan, you can always exchange it for gold in your country or something like this. So they want to create, in other words, an alternative reserve system, because now the only reserve system in the world is American dollar. So which is interesting, of course. And once you understand that the world is shifting actually that fast into the direction that is non-American, of course, it becomes interesting what type of implications we will have like 10 years down the road. Because I mean, I think maybe you also remember, like, even 10 years ago, people thought about the idea of Chinese challenging America as actually hypothetical, right? It's something that people, not all people took it for granted that China would actually reach this level that it can like directly challenge American hegemony, as it already does now, for example, with trying to come up with the idea of alternative like reserve currency, like the reserve system. So it's definitely interesting. Of course, and one has to think how the world would look like, let's say, in 10 years. And of course, we entering just definitely territory where basically we don't. I think most of us we don't really know, and it's also a very unique situation as you said before because it is if it is a multipolar, no one knows. No one knows what type of actors can have a certain alignment in the future. For example, I definitely think that American Russian realignment doesn't necessarily mean that Russia would again abandon its relations with China. Rather than it would look like a more complex equation where Russia would try to get a certain benefits for like for disaligning itself from Chinese in certain areas. For example, maybe not giving China, not giving China a lot of oil or something like that, or maybe a lot of gas. Even though, of course, it's probably impossible to think because they build the whole now ecosystem, like ecosystem around giving China Russian gas. So of course, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it is an interesting time because the world changes, and I think it's an interesting time to observe how the world would look like. But then, of course, something that I still come back to this idea. Um, we all kind of wait and see what's the American response because it's still it feels that still no matter how China rose in comparatively as economic power, I mean, the still like American capacity to impact the world is still great. And of course, it's also coming back to the whole, AI debate, artificial intelligence, and the future of technology as well. So I guess we have to see how it unfolds. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I think you are talking about two questions. The first is about the donor dominance, and
Hmm.
China is trying to challenge the U.S. financial hegemony. China is
Right.
trying to internationalize its currency,
Right.
renminbi.
Right.
China has been doing that for a long time. And the second is about the foundation of Sino-Russian relationship, probably. From my point of view, it's always complex. I think
Hmm.
right now, due to the same distrust
Hmm.
against the U.S., due
Hmm.
to the same fear for the American pressure, China and Russia are united. They work very closely,
Hmm.
but there is also fundamental distrust between the two countries. From my
Hmm.
point of view, for Russia right now, Russia is too dependent on Chinese support economically and morally and maybe geopolitically. I don't think Russia likes that because Russia is a very uh, proud country,
Hmm.
and Russia don't want to. I think Russia does not want to be too dependent on Chinese support. For
Hmm.
many analysts believe, okay, Russia and China are probably partnership or allies, but Russia is a junior partner of China. My supervisor has always emphasized Russia and China are partners. But Russia is a junior partner, and the relationship is asymmetrical. So, because of the war in Ukraine, I think China has more leverage on
Hmm.
Russia. I don't think Russia. I don't think this is what Russia likes. Uh, and from Chinese side, I think many Chinese people distrust Russia. There is
Hmm.
very strong influence. Some scholars, for example, one scholar has a name Feng Yujun. He's one scholar specialized on Russia. He's a Russia expert in China. Uh, he dislikes Russia. He always criticizes Russia. I mean, in China, very influential. So his opinion, his idea can spread in China without obstacle. We know Chinese leadership is probably very friendly toward Russia, but there is still space for Chinese scholars to criticize Russia. I think there is deep distrust inside Chinese scholars and the Chinese ordinary people. They believe Russia is aggressive and Russia is a danger for China. And Russia has seized a huge territory from China. Russia has harmed China much more than any other countries. Maybe the second country is Japan, but Japan has returned all the territory which it has occupied during World War II, like the northeastern China and Taiwan, but Russia has seized the territory from China about 1.5 million square meters. And the Mongolia is also separate from China because of the support of Russia or Soviet Union. So I mean, in both Russia and China, there is deep distrust. Even the leadership in both countries are trying to work very closely, but I mean the distrust is still deep. When the circumstance are changed, I think the relation will become more complex.
Right.
In the past, people are talking about the Sino-Russian relationship without a limit. No, there is always limits. There is always a limit.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I also don't believe in this, like the Sino-Russian relationship is something without limit. I mean, simply because I don't think they're that much aligned, even culturally or from the perspective of civil society alignment. Because I don't think like Russian people like deeply think about Chinese people as we are friends. It's more like this geopolitical narrative, and of course it feels good for Russian people to know that they are not really completely isolated from the world. Once you mentioned I remember like the imagery from when you remember Putin visited last time China. He gave like press conference in front of this like Chinese like big palace. I don't know the name unfortunately, but I mean it's something that of course is a very impressive PR, so to speak, because you have like this image that Russia has friends, and of course, it pays dividends right now in the sense that Russia can go and present to the West primarily because, oh, you know, we actually still value it somewhere. Like, look at because I think it's still true that what everything that Russia does, like internationally, I think it does for Western audience because they're very considerate in terms of how this perceived in the West, less so in other countries, and of course, as you said. Yeah, I mean, I think Russian, as you said, yeah, China doesn't trust Russia or like 100%. Yeah, and I think I can definitely see why, because I mean, and Russian history is also very unpredictable. It is the history of significant swings and significant changes, and to a certain extent, I mean, Russia is, I mean, dangerous to itself. I mean, like the Russian society and Russian people, because I mean, they did change history so many times and suffered actually themselves so many times because of the changes they inflicted on themselves. So, I mean, can I see some crazy person coming back like in power in Russia and completely changing, I would say, the trajectory of Russian, I mean, history in a way that reintegrating with the West and maybe putting like, you know, NATO troops or NATO troops on, let's say, Chinese-Russian border. I think this can happen. I mean, I mean, I think like the more Russia goes into one direction, the more almost power it accumulates to go into the other direction. Because unfortunately, Russia has a very, like I would say, I mean, Russian people in general, they always need to go for some reason almost all in one direction. They have like this uncomfortable, I would say, anxiety with just sitting in neutrality. They cannot just sit and think about themselves as not contributing to something greater. So they always find a way to make a change in the world, if it makes sense. And of course, once you mentioned, yeah, I think Russia still struggles a little bit with this complex that it lost the capacity to actually change the world to a certain extent. So it tries to find ways to compensate for that. And what I mean by that, you can actually literally see it because I mean, it's not Soviet Union anymore. It kind of lost its crown of being, the second biggest opponent of the United States, or like the second biggest and most important country. And I think it still struggles to find like what's Russian meaning then, because I feel for Russia living in the world without Russia contributing some significant change is actually hard.
Mhm.
They're still trying actually to find meaning. And of course I remember, for example, in 2010s in Russian narrative cultural debate, it was a very big debate what's Russian, what's meaning for Russia in the world.
Mhm.
And now of course they try to say it is this multipolar world, we're contributing to this multipolar world. I mean, something in me says that it's not the ultimate answer. Actually, they're still searching for meaning. So, just I want to maybe confirm your point. Yeah, I mean, there is definitely. I would say it's. I understand like why Chinese side doesn't trust Russia 100%. And as you said, like Russia was the part of century of humiliation. I mean, that's also true. And like to the same extent as like Great Britain and other great powers, European great powers, because back then Russia was just another European power. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, you have mentioned that Russia can be their own danger. I think this is applicable for Chinese too. For Chinese too, the Chinese can be also their own danger because people are not always rational. Sometimes people are very emotional.
Right,
They react emotionally. They
right,
cannot always act rationally.
right.
Actually, I'm very interested in Russia's perception of China.
Hmm.
So, because just now I have talked about the Chinese perception of Russia, very complex. Many
Right.
people admire Russia. In China, there are so many Russia fans. We call it
Hmm.
Russia fans. Of course, are not Ukraine fans, European fans, and American fans, but many Russia fans. So it's true. But on the other hand, like I have mentioned, Feng Yijun and other scholars are very critical toward
Right.
Russia. So I'm interested in Russia's perception of China. From my perspective, it's also very complex.
Hmm.
I want to talk about something about cultural identity. I
Hmm.
think Russia wants to be one part of the European civilization. This is long time from Peter the Great.
Hmm.
Russia wants to be integrated into the European community. Russia wants to be one part of the European civilization.
Hmm.
Actually, Russia was one part of the European civilization,
Right.
and even the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
They have the ideology of Marxism.
Hmm.
Marxism is a Western ideology, right?
Right. Right.
So, I mean, Russia is using Western ideology against Western
Hmm.
powers.
Hmm.
This is very interesting. I think Russia admits that Russia
Hmm.
culture is probably not as advanced as European culture,
Hmm.
probably because Russia has always learned a lot from European civilization. Probably for many Russian people, yes, European countries are very rich, culturally very influential, and Russia is in some sense behind the European
Hmm.
civilization. But for centuries, Russia believes it's more advanced than Asian countries, than the Eastern countries like China. Okay, so Russia is very confident. Or Russia was very confident
Hmm.
in front of Asian countries.
Hmm.
But right now the situation has changed. Both Russia economy and Russia population are
Hmm.
just 10% of China. So,
Hmm.
and Russia are perceived as a junior
Hmm.
partner or little brother of China. So, how do Russia people perceive this change? How do Russia perceive China right now?
Hmm.
Any insights from you?
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting questions. I guess a few things to say about that. I mean, first, of course, I think that relations with China is, I think, a prerogative more of this geopolitical debate. In a way, there is, I would say, because it is mainly geopolitical debate. I would say it's highly censored. I wouldn't think any professor who is really critical of China would work in a Russian university, for example, because it would be impossible to express this opinion because it is a part of like this bigger narrative, and you can go outside this narrative. But to this exact point, I can definitely say I would say before the war, and I would say maybe before like 2018. Of course, there were a lot of critics of China, and a lot of people. There is like this, I would say, among people, the common fear that China would go and conquer or buy even Siberia or something like this. That's very. I think it's still very prevalent. Yeah. And of course, when you look at those pictures where you see Chinese-Russian border and you see these cities that, agglomerations that have 100 million people, and then you see Russian cities that have barely like, I don't know, 10, like 100,000 maximum people. I mean, of course, you start thinking about whether this can be a possibility, or whether, like, people start like questioning whether, the demise of Russia is an interest of China, for example, because China can go and like probably literally buy those lands at a certain point, because, I mean, China has a lot of capital now. So this is also like the second point. And but then, of course, what also makes me think, like the last point I can say, again, what I mentioned before, I think because there is like a very little actual human to human exchange. Of course, there are like Chinese tourists and Russian people, Russians go to China as well. But I feel it's still a very nascent, I would say, alignment between Russia and China. I think it's not. I mean, it's something that's happening almost there. So, for example, when relations between Russia and the West and Europe, relations were good, people really went willingly to Europe, and there was a lot of exchange between Russian students coming to Europe, European students coming to Russia. So there was a lot of exchange in civil society terms. And I think this happening actually between China and Russia, maybe because, of course, the distances are also very huge. I mean, most Russians live in Europe. I mean, they don't live in Asia. I mean, some people live in Vladivostok. Of course, I think people who live in Vladivostok, of course, they probably go and visit China way much more frequently. But of course, it is still a very new thing, I would say. So in this sense, I think like those three things maybe give you some idea. But for me, I think it's still Russia-China relation. It's something that happening for, like, I would say, elites. It's a geopolitic. So it's not real development that captures like ordinary people imagination, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dimi.
That was
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting conversation. But yeah,
okay.
I think 1 hour has passed. Maybe
Yeah.
it's time to close our conversation.
Yeah.
Of course, Sino-Russia relations are a very huge topic. I
Yes,
think,
it is. It
but
is.
today we have discussed some interesting
Super.
points. Maybe in the future, I hope I have opportunity to discuss with you
Yeah.
again about some more concrete topics.
Yeah.
Today is quite general. Maybe
Yeah.
next time we have more concrete topics. So
Like,
thank you and
thank you.
yeah, goodbye.
Goodbye.